U.S. companies added 208,000 workers in the month of November, according to the ADP private payroll report. The increase indicates a steady progress in the labor market and follows a revised gain of 233,000 jobs the prior month. Falling energy costs and resilient domestic demand encouraged employers to add jobs, even as global economies have struggled recently. According to the report, goods-producing industries, which include manufacturers and construction companies, increased headcounts by 32,000 in November, while employment in construction rose by 17,000 and factories added 11,000 jobs. Payrolls gain have averaged about 500,000 so far this year, putting the labor market on pace for its strongest year since 1999. Federal Reserve officials have cited labor market progress as they remove unprecedented accommodations meant to stimulate the economy. The central bankers at their most recent meeting in October ended a monthly asset purchase program that ballooned the balance sheet to almost $4.5 trillion while keeping interest rates near zero. To further discuss the ADP's private employment report, I was joined earlier by Peter Schiff, CEO of Euro-Pacific Capital. Now, I first asked Peter for his take on the change in private employment since 2001. Now, since the 2001 recession, you can see that employment numbers post-2011 are as good as they've been at any time in that same period. Take a look at what Peter had to say about those numbers.
Well, again, the numbers came out below expectations, so it was actually a pretty weak September where you normally see a bigger pickup in hiring. But I think what you really have to understand when it comes to these numbers is, first of all, we had a tremendous loss of jobs during the Great Recession, and so we're not really gaining them back. And the ones that we're gaining are very low quality. I mean, when you look beneath the surface and you find out that what we're really doing is replacing full-time jobs with part-time jobs, jobs that have higher pay with jobs that have lower pay, you really begin to understand what this 200,000 number really means. Because if we destroy 400,000 full-time jobs and we replace them with 600,000 part-time jobs, the people who have those jobs are not necessarily better off because now they have, more jobs. They may be earning less money. And I think a lot of the people who are working are people who would rather not be working. We have a lot of people who are in the 60s and 70s who would prefer to enjoy their retirement. Instead, they're taking jobs. And because if you look at net, the 55 and over group is really the only demographic age group that is gaining jobs on net.
That is an interesting point and something to keep an eye on as well. But, ADP's small business report shows 101,000 jobs added in November, half of the total. So is that what we want to see here, Peter? What do you think?
Well, I think the kind of jobs we really need are in production. I mean, we're adding all these jobs in retail, trade, and hospitality. People get jobs as a bartender or a waiter, or they work in a hospital. These are not the jobs that people can support a family on, that they can buy a house on, that they can save for their retirement. We need productive, higher-paying jobs. And unfortunately, as long as the Fed is artificially stimulating the economy with cheap money, we're never going to get those type of jobs.
Peter, what about oil? How's that going to change the U.S. growth path here?
Well, I don't think this decline in oil prices is going to be permanent. So I think that motorists can enjoy the savings while they last. But I think what's really driving the oil market is this perception that the U.S. recovery is real and that we're going to be raising interest rates, whereas Europe and Asia, they're still in recession. They're going to be doing quantitative easing. And so people think the dollar is going to rise in an environment of global weakness. And so they're looking for a big demand, a reduction in demand for oil. And that's really what's driving the price down. But I think that everybody's got this wrong, that I think the U.S. economy is much weaker than people believe. And rather than the Fed raising interest rates next year, they're far more likely to launch another round of quantitative easing, and that's going to be a game changer for the U.S. dollar and for the price of oil.
What do you make of the failure of the Swiss referendum to force the Swiss National Bank to hold more assets in gold?
Well, I think it's ironic, and maybe it's going to mark the low point for gold. We'll see. Gold sold off below 1150 on the announcement, even though it was highly expected. Pretty much nobody thought the Swiss were going to do the right thing and pass this. But the crazy thing is how many people were warning the Swiss how reckless and how crazy this would be. The establishment was out in force. The mainstream, the bankers, the investment firms, telling the Swiss how dumb they would be to back their currency, even 1/5 of their reserves in gold. They should have all of their reserves, 100% in euros and dollars, as if there's any real value there. They would be much better off backing up their currency with something real as opposed to just other fiat currencies. You know, the Swiss had 40% gold backing as late as 1999, and a gold-backed Swiss franc didn't hurt the Swiss economy in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s. I don't know why people think it would be so detrimental to the Swiss economy now. In fact, it would save the Swiss franc and liberate the Swiss people from the problems of the euro.
Peter, everyone seems to be talking about the Russian ruble in a free fall these days. But apparently Mother Russia is stocking up on gold reserves, and the central bank's reserves would now cover at least 1/4 of the narrow ruble money supply. So why isn't anyone talking about that?
Well, I'm talking about it.
You are.
And I think that's very significant. Yeah, and I also think, you know, there are a lot of people who thought Russia would sell their gold to defend the ruble. And I give Putin a lot more credit than that. I don't think he's so dumb that he would sell his gold. I think he'd much rather sell his dollars and use this weakness in the price of gold to increase Russia's gold reserves, because ultimately it's your gold reserves that are going to determine the strength of your currency and the underlying productivity of your economy. The dollar reserves are not going to do you much good because they're not going to have much value.
Peter, Citigroup chief economist Willem Bouter, he calls gold intrinsically useless, and he says, quote, gold is unlike any other commodity. The only thing that comes close to it are Bitcoin and similar digital peer-to-peer currencies. Gold is costly to extract from the earth and to refine to a reasonable degree of purity. There's an unknown upper limit to the total amount that it is recoverable at any cost, and it is costly to store. It has no significant remaining uses as a producer of goods. Equivalent or superior alternatives exist from all its industrial uses. Peter, do you agree with that statement?
It couldn't be more wrong. You know, he's describing dollars or euros or yen. That has intrinsically no value. You can create as many as you want at no cost, and they really have no use. Gold is probably the most valuable metal that is mined from the earth. But maybe this guy should take a look at all the uses for gold, because beyond money and beyond jewelry, which is obvious, I mean, to say it has no value, well, then what are they going to make jewelry out of if they're not going to make it out of gold, right? So there's a lot of demand for gold jewelry. But if you look in the furniture industry, you see gold, you know, in furniture, in picture frames, but it's in avionics, it's in electronics, it's in the medical industry. There are so many uses for gold. And one of the reasons that gold is not used more is because it's too expensive. And so people substitute less effective metals for gold because they can't afford it. But if you're trying to have the very best, for example, if you're NASA and you're building a spaceship and you can't have your circuits failing, you're using gold. I mean, gold is in cell phones. Gold is in a lot of things where you need something to work and you need a reliable metal to do it. But, you know, look in dentistry. I mean, you want to get your teeth filled with copper or lead. I mean, you want to get the best fillings, crowns in your mouth, you know, they're going to be made of gold. I mean, if you can't afford gold, then you can have porcelain or something else.
The best crowns are not made of gold anymore. I'm sorry, I have to cut you off there.
Yes,
the best crowns are not made of gold anymore. They were at one point, but
no, they still are. If you want the best crown, your dentist will give you the option. Says you can have gold or you can save money and have porcelain. But, you know, Bill Gates, if he's going to get a crown, he's going for gold. He's not going to take porcelain.
Bill Gates, if you're watching, we'd love to know what type of crown you'd prefer. That was one of our all-time favorites, Mr. Peter Schiff, CEO of Euro-Pacific Capital. Time now for a quick break, but stick around because when we return, David